Mike.
I'm Brad.
And this is Ministry Chemistry.
Here we go.
Welcome back to another episode of Ministry Chemistry. We're so glad you're listening today. We're a little heartbroken. Maybe some of you have read or heard the news last week. I don't know, how would we say it? A leading voice in Christianity, a famed apologist. Anyway, Ravi Zacharias passed away. And for those who have followed him or listened to him, I can't imagine you would feel anything just but heartbroken, other than he's in heaven, so that's joyous and celebratory. But yeah, that was a little bit rough. How'd you guys take that?
I was a little shocked. It seemed like the news that he was getting worse kind of came out of nowhere, and then the next thing you know, he's gone, and it took my breath away a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that he had cancer until probably within the last few weeks. So has that news been around for a while, or is that fairly recent?
I think it's fairly recent.
Yeah.
His daughter posted something like on the RVIM Facebook page, Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. But that was only like within the last month.
Yeah,
tops.
I would say that.
Yeah, so I'm curious how y'all came across Ravi Zacharias.
How I came across him?
Yeah. Like, I think there are some noteworthy voices in Christianity that people have recommended a book, or I've seen them teach at a conference, or, their church is huge, and so you just wonder who's the leader of that church. So I'm curious how y'all came across Ravi Zacharias.
For me, it was probably on the radio.
Me too.
He just has
that
radio? Yeah. He just has that voice that kind of captivates you. And I don't remember what station I was listening to, but I just remember getting in the car, turning it on, and this voice just mesmerizing me and pulling me in with how he described who God was.
Yeah. Mike, what about you?
I think I came across him through like a Kindle suggestion, like based on books that you've read or searched for, you might like this. So I think I remember reading, I think the first book I read of his was Jesus Among Other Gods on my Kindle. And that's a great book, and obviously if anyone doesn't know Ravi Zacharias, he grew up in India and has a Hindu background, and gave his life to Christ, and like the rest is kind of history. But so his perspective on other world religions comes out in that book, and it's really awesome. But from that, I started watching like YouTube videos. I love watching apologists or listening to apologists debate atheists especially. And man, Ravi Zacharias was awesome at that. And someone posted this week about how he did that. And I think the statement that caught me was that he cared more about the person he was debating than being right. Mm-hmm. So he had this humble confidence about him, which I think is kind of hard to master. Like, he knew exactly what he was talking about, and he was okay letting you know that he knew what he was talking about. But he did it in such a way that he just seemed humble about it,
He always seemed like the care for the person he was debating was just evident from the moment he opened his mouth.
Yes.
Thanking them for the question or thanking them for the statement that they had made, and then he went into his exhortation.
Well, in his responses, you could tell he was listening to what his counterpart had said. It wasn't just, oh, they're talking about this bullet point on this slide, so I will now reiterate my bullet points when someone says that bullet point, you know?
Yeah.
He was sincerely listening and trying to understand their heart in their stance or their ask, and then, you know, springboarded from there. I first discovered him on the radio too, and it's actually made me think about how much I miss waking up to a radio alarm clock. I never really woke up to an alarm. I always had a radio alarm clock. And so years ago, I had it set to a Christian station, and I used to have to get up really early for my job at the time. And some of those mornings when it's too early for them to play music, they're playing Ravi Zacharias or Dr. David Jeremiah or, you know, like some of Charles Stanley, some of these teachers. And so it was always such a comforting voice to wake up to. I do remember that. The radio station would also play all Christmas music all the time in December because it was a Christian station, right? So it had tons of benefits.
One of the things I loved, and there's one specific, it's kind of like a stage, like an auditorium type environment, and you know they've been speaking, but they've invited other people. And one of my favorite speakers always does this, and he invites people who disagree with him to go to the front of the line. And so Ravi Zacharias would always invite people who disagreed with him, like, hey, I want your questions. You're who we're here for. And there's one specifically where he's invites this young guy up, and he knows exactly what he's doing, but he sets the guy up to talk himself into a hole. So basically, like, Ravi Zacharias turns the guy's question into questions and essentially gets the guy who's asking the question to start doubting himself and the reason that he asked the question in the first place. And just the way he was able to do that was masterful. It was always cool to watch. You guys talk about the voice, though. One of the things that always stood out to me about Ravi Zacharias, he almost whistles when he says his S's.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's almost cartoonish. You know, you ever watch a cartoon where like it's very pronounced?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Anytime I listen to Ravi Zacharias, though, I would immediately pick up on the whistle with the S's.
That's a trademark move, right? Like that's God creating him in his mother's womb and then saying, oh, we're going to give this guy a whistle. Give a little whistle.
Yeah.
Give a little whistle.
Yeah. It's pretty cool, though.
So this made me think of a question that I've asked some people in my life before, because I'm always trying to, I don't know, just get a good read on who I should read and expand my library and my, you know, knowledge realms. And so a question I've often asked some friends is like, hey, if you could only read 3 authors the rest of your life, or 5 authors, or 10, you know, whatever the number, who would those authors be? You can read their entire works. Anything old, anything they might come up with new, unless, you know, they've already deceased. Who would those individuals be? So I'm curious, and we're going to come back to Ravi a little bit. Ravi Zacharias isn't on my list of people that I would read if I had to, like, a limited list. But I'm curious who you guys would say would be a part of your limited lists.
So 3? Sure,
let's go with 3. Why not?
Okay. Well, if you've listened to more than one episode, you know who my number 1 is. It's N.T. Wright. I've read, I don't know, I've probably read maybe 10 of his books. I think he's written 85 books, somewhere in that realm. Yeah. So, I mean, really, you could just do him and that would be enough. And yeah, I mean, everything he's written. No, you know, I think when you're approaching everything theologically and you've written that many books, there is some repetition in there, you know, and you hear it when you start reading some of the stuff. But yeah, N.T. Wright would be number 1 on my list. Number Number 2 on my list would probably be C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis is on my list.
I've never read anything of C.S. Lewis's that I didn't like.
Oh, okay.
That I didn't like. Yeah, I mean, I've
read
Chronicles of Narnia. My cousin asked me not too long ago about a book to kind of like just a baseline of theology and beliefs and stuff. And Mere Christianity is my go-to for that, for sure. I mean, it's just an awesome book. But the third one would be non-Christian related is David McCullough. I love David McCullough. Oh yeah, David McCullough. His approach to history is just, it's unbelievable. Sometimes if you don't like detail, you wouldn't like David McCullough, because literally, so this is just one example. I read his book on the Wright brothers, which obviously I would read that book, but he even talks about like the furnishings and the paint color on the interior of the house that they grew up in. That's how much detail he goes into. So he really wants you to understand the character that he's writing about. So
is it historical fiction?
What's that?
Is it historical fiction or is he a nonfiction author?
Nonfiction. Yeah, nonfiction.
You have no fiction authors.
What's that?
You have no fiction authors. I mean, C.S.
So,
Lewis
here's the thing.
has written some.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, I would say that C.S. Lewis is kind of both sides. I mean, he's most famous for Chronicles of Narnia, which is fiction, but there's a lot of theology in Chronicles of Narnia. A lot.
For sure.
So here's my thing with that. Like, it's not that I don't like fiction. And I think there's, if I want to read for entertainment, or if I want to do something for entertainment, I want to watch TV or watch a movie. And it's not that I don't read for entertainment, but if I'm going to read for entertainment, I want to get knowledge from that time, from that investment. So if I'm going to read, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be nonfiction.
Brad, what about you? 3 authors, all you can read, all you can eat.
All you can eat. Well, if I'm going to read, it's not going to be for entertainment. It's not something that I enjoy doing all that much.
Not even if you go to the beach? Are you not a beach reader?
I'm married to a woman who is not a beach sitter.
Oh.
We don't sit out in the sun a whole lot.
Oh, okay.
So no. But 3 authors. I would say Mark Batterson would be one. I've read quite a few of his books. Big fan of let's see, where can I go from there? Eric Samuel Tim I'm a huge fan of his, and I think I've mentioned it before. It's been in youth group. Mark Batterson and Eric Samuel Tim are 2 authors who, when you read their books, you can actually hear their voice when you're reading it, because they write like they talk. And I'm a big fan of that, because it's real conversational. It's not stuffy language. And they're so engaging, in person and when they speak in front of people, that as I read, I can hear their voice, and that adds to the level of interest and engagement. Number 3, I don't know, Dr. Seuss.
You really wouldn't want to be without a Walk-It in My Pocket. I understand.
Well, of course not. If you're going to have a Walk-It, where else would it be?
In your pocket. So C.S. Lewis is one of mine. I actually would put Roald Dahl on my top 3. no joke. I know Dr. Seuss may have been a little bit of a joke, but Roald Dahl definitely is in my top 3. I think he's imaginative and playful and creative and just fun. And after reading C.S. Lewis, that's probably what I'm going to need. Just a little break. And then I would put an author that I've never actually read very much of her work, but I find her that the respect and admiration she gets often warrants me to dive deeper, which would be Maya Angelou. I think I'd like to expand my horizons a bit.
What has she written?
Why the Caged Bird Sings, I know. That's the one I know. I think there's poems and there's novels. And that's the thing. I don't know much about her other than she is spoken about with great respect and admiration. So I'm like, I need to dive into some of that.
I need me some of that.
So it's just taking my place of that, because I think of Ravi Zacharias and like, that is a voice I've appreciated. We now have literature that we appreciate. We've shared that with folks who are listening. Are there other voices like Ravi Zacharias that you have found you really appreciate? That have been sort of, I don't want to say spiritual mentors or guides, but they have been, right? Even though we haven't known them personally, they've been voices that have helped shape our path and our walk with Jesus. Do you have folks like that?
More well-known people?
Yes.
Joel Osteen.
Guide to Smile. He wrote a great book called The Guide of Smiles.
The Guide to Blinking.
Incessantly. Let me think.
I think for me, just as Mike talks about N.T. Wright, I talk about Andy Stanley. The interesting thing is, I wasn't introduced to Andy Stanley until about 2011, I want to say. And then it was like, holy smokes, where's this guy been? So he's a voice that I've never met that definitely has shaped and impacted the past 10 years of my faith journey.
In what way?
I think in the ways that he communicates specifically. So a book that I return to every time I have to teach is his book on communication, Communicating for Change. I can't recommend it highly enough. And I read it and I took notes, and I have index cards of questions I need to ask myself when I'm teaching. So learning his method in that way, and then watching him approach his own teachings and communications with that, has been very inspiring, because I think if he does anything well, which I think Andy Stanley does a lot of things well, he identifies his audience and knows who he's speaking to and what he wants to tell them.
Yeah.
And so often I have heard communicators and teachers say, well, you have to paint with a broad paintbrush, because you have everyone from, littles to bigs, from smarts to stupids. No, nobody has ever said that. But like, you've got every, swath of color in the room. And it's like, sure. But to me, a good teacher will bring us all to a common place and say, this might look different in each life, but we have this commonality amongst us, and then help us get from point A to point B. And I think he does that really well in a very understandable way, without being too intellectual and too heady and too academic. And there's nothing wrong with intellect and academia. I love Timothy Keller, and he was a shaping voice prior to me even knowing of Andy Stanley. But there's a difference in his style and his delivery that tunes different people in. So,
well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because that is definitely my. I didn't come to even know who N.T. Wright was, and until I really started like pursuing call to ministry. But before that, before I even like came back to the church after an extended period away, Tim Keller was kind of a voice.
Oh, yeah.
And what's crazy about that is literally I didn't read, if you had asked me 20 years ago what my favorite authors were, I would probably say whoever wrote the Hardy Boys, because at that point that was the only book I'd ever read. But I don't know, I just got this insatiable desire to read, and I was walking through a Barnes and Noble one day, and The Reason for God was on sale. It was like marked down 50% off, and I was like, oh, that looks interesting. It has a pretty cover, so I'll buy that. And I read it, and it just kind of like, I think I've given that book to probably 5 or 8 people, and each of them has given it to people. You know, it just it answered a lot of questions that I was struggling with. And Tim Keller, he's very heady.
Yeah.
He he goes very deep. But I think even when he's using like PhD language, he explains stuff in a way that anyone could wrap their head around it.
He does.
So I've watched a lot of YouTube videos of him. So yeah, I mean, he's just, I think even like before I came back to the church and gave my life to Christ, he was almost like my voice calling in the wilderness and reading and listening to him. And now that I've been in the church for a long time, he even forces me to rethink some of the things that I always thought that I knew or thought that I had a firm grasp on.
Timothy Keller, there are certain things some teachers in my life have said. Timothy Keller is one of them, and he said the most beautiful thing about his wife once. She once asked him, "Why do you love me?" And he said, "I just love you." And yeah, but why do you love me? I just love you. And when pushed on that by someone else, he said, because the minute I start listing all the reasons and all the ways that I love my wife, and there are many, 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 he said, once those things fall away, or if they were to fade or change, I don't ever want her to question my love for her, because those aren't, it's like the sum of them aren't the only reason I love her. There are unable to be expressed reasons as well. And so I do just love her because she is. I love her. And then he used that example and said, I believe that's how God loves us. Once we start listing reasons, it's a works-based righteousness, right? And he's like, that's just not true. Sure, there's pride in our Heavenly Father on things we do, or don't, disappointment in things we don't do. But beyond all of that, there's just this love abounding. And I was like, oh, Timothy Keller, good grief. Bring a girl to tears, would ya?
I think one of the things I love about all three of the people we've mentioned so far, and Brad hasn't had his turn yet, but I love the Tim Kellers and the N.T. Wrights of the world because they challenge me to think on a deeper level than I just would on my own. They just their approach to study and theology, it's very challenging. But at the same time, I too love the Andy Stanleys of the world because not everyone you're teaching or preaching to has a PhD. Some people don't have a college or high school education. So you got to figure out, I love the challenge of taking that PhD level study and knowledge and offering it to someone with a GED. And because that's important. And I think those guys would equally say, like, we can't just teach to the theology professors in the room. I think it was Andy Stanley who kind of left me with something that I've always thought about in preparing a sermon or preparing to teach is we have to assume that there's one unsaved person in the room, no matter how large the gathering is. And if there is, and we assume that, that's our primary audience in that moment. And I've always thought about that.
Yeah, Louis Giglio, I think Louis Giglio has done amazing things for the kingdom through the power of the Holy Spirit within him. But he's not a teacher that I particularly listen to often. But he did say something once that just shocked me. I was at Passion one year with students, and we're sitting in the Mercedes-Benz stadium down in Atlanta, Georgia, 80,000 people all around us. And he said, everything that we're doing is worth it if just one person comes to know Jesus more. So it wasn't about moving the nozzle of 80,000 people. Sure, it could have been, but he's like, if just one person in here today who didn't really know or want to follow Jesus now does, then it was all worth it. And I think that's the same vein of thinking. I love that. Brad, what about you?
Well, if we're going to throw out a little more love on Tim Keller, his book, Prodigal God, it's rocked me every time I've read it. And I think I've read it 3 times now. And I've gone through the curriculum that he has with it, with a group of students. It's just amazing at the depth of the entire story of the lost son. So more love on Tim Keller. Somebody a little maybe not as known recently. I think he died a few years ago as well, as Chuck Colson. I just remember it's probably been maybe 15 or 20 years ago, watching a few videos of him speak. And he just has that, in a way, a Ravi Zacharias way of just drawing you in with story. And he just ties his story so well into the gospel. And, he told a story of one time he was on a plane and there was this young person next to him saying they were going to go pitch a TV series to some higher ups. And it was all about this angel, and he's like, well, that's great. Good luck with that. You don't have a shot at getting this passed at all. And it happened to be the writer of Touched by an Angel, and clearly that took off. And he just made a comment of, look how much I know and how much God can work through those things. So just interesting the way he tells stories. There's something magical in a way about storytellers.
Absolutely.
And I think that the best communicators have that storytelling ability that is just captivating. They draw you in, and you're hooked before you even know it.
I couldn't agree more. And the authors we talked about today, I think that's why we can't put some books down, right?
Right.
We don't want them to end. It's like, wait, there's more here. I just want to literally dive in these pages or be in your presence and hear you. And I do think that's a beautiful, powerful gift. So this is our little ode to Ravi. We've talked about some other folks today. We're curious, listeners, who do you listen to? Who do you read? Who impacts and affects or has impacted and influenced your walk and journey with God throughout your story? Because those people matter, and it's good to pause and reflect. And if you don't have voices or you're not reading in those veins, we would highly encourage you to take a step out. Try some of the folks we listened today. Ask people that you trust and respect who they listen and read, because it can make a world of difference sometimes. For Ministry Chemistry, I'm Renee.
Still Mike.
And Brett.
We'll talk to you next time.
Time and time again where you don't get that precise answer, and your soul sort of struggles and struggles and struggles. Jesus says this to the enemy of our souls. He says, be gone. He says, you shall not test You're not going to tempt the Lord your God. You're not going to make your entire belief system on getting what you want at that precise moment.